Well, yesterday, 4 Americans and 3 Russians were indicted from the Uruhu movement. Now, we've had Chairman O'Malley on the show before to discuss the fact that he had been raided, that the government was going after this movement, the Uruhu movement, trying to paint them as being essentially Russian puppets. Now, we've heard this narrative throughout. Oh, gosh, now for how many years? 7, 8 years. There's been accusations of certain Americans from certain groups or with certain political viewpoints as being Putin puppets or Russian assets. Trump being the most notable one who was accused of this. But the Uruhu movement, they'd been going after them. They're very much against the current government or the current positions of the government of the United States. And so because of that, they're painted as being assets of Russians. They've now been indicted. With us now is Caleb Maupin. You've seen him on this show many times. Many of you really love Caleb. He is an author, journalist, political analyst, but he's also the founder of the Center for Political Innovation. And the Center for Political Innovation has been very much involved in the defense of the people in the Uruhu movement who are being accused of these pretty absurd accusations. So, Caleb, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
I want to read from the press release that was put out yesterday from the Department of Justice so that people can understand what is being what these people are being accused of, and how I think scary this actually is. It starts off: U.S. citizens and Russian intelligence officers charged with conspiring to use U.S. citizens as illegal agents of the Russian government. Says defendants sought to sow discord, spread pro-Russia propaganda, and interfere in elections within the United States. A federal grand jury in Tampa, Florida, returned a superseding indictment charging 4 U.S. citizens and 3 Russian nationals with working on behalf of the Russian government and in conjunction with the Russian Federal Security Service, the FSB, to conduct a multi-year foreign malign influence campaign in the United States. Among other conduct, the superseding indictment alleges that the Russian defendants recruited, funded, and directed U.S. political groups to act as unregistered illegal agents of the Russian government and sow discord and spread pro-Russian propaganda. The indicted intelligence officers in particular participated in covertly funding and directing candidates for local office within the United States. Caleb, first of all, tell us what the Uruhu movement is about so that people can understand how absurd this accusation is on its face.
Well, this is an organization that has been around for many decades. They are Black nationalists in their orientation. My understanding is that their slogan is unity through reparations. They approach white people to pay reparations to the Black community. They use those reparations to create services in the Black community, like farmers markets, services for pregnant women, access to health care, classes on proper eating, and et cetera. And they've been around for quite some time. They are one of the many wings of the Black liberation movement in the United States. They have a particular interpretation of the history of colonialism. They see the various African peoples throughout the world as one nationality. And they have been doing this for many, many, many decades. And now we see them, not only have they been raided by the FBI, had guns and drones flown into their homes, guns drawn and pointed in their faces, dragged out in handcuffs. And now we see them indicted, facing possibly 10 years in prison. This should be utterly horrifying to anyone who knows the history of McCarthyism and civil liberties and COINTELPRO in this country.
Okay, so these are Black national. This is an organization that supports. I'm trying to figure out how this connects to Russia at all. How does a group that is advocating for reparations, advocating for embetterment of the Black community in America, how are they at all connected to Russians or even a pro-Russia narrative?
Yeah, if you read this indictment and if you read the press release from the U.S. Department of Justice, there's barely any crimes even listed in there. I mean, they list things like they spoke on Zoom calls, that there was a Zoom call in Russia a video conference and they went on it, that's not illegal. It's not illegal to go on a Zoom call. It says that they sent out an email, promoting their interpretation, their understanding of the war in Ukraine, pointing out that among the forces in Ukraine backed by the United States, you have open white supremacists like the Azov Battalion. That's not illegal. The only thing in this indictment that you could possibly argue is really illegal is they claim that somehow their election campaign that they ran was somehow funded or directed from Russia. Now, obviously, that would be illegal, but I understand their attorneys are prepared to prove in court that that was not the case, and they've been running election campaigns like this for many decades. This Russian individual, Ionov, that they list as being their secret puppet controller, wasn't even born at the time. They had already started their organization, run similar campaigns, been doing these kind of operations, trying to bring services to the Black community. So this is really a really terrifying document. They're basically alleging that doing the activism that they do was somehow an operation from Russia, that somehow by spreading their perspective on the Ukraine conflict, which is their view, they do take the view that they view the United States government and its allies around the world as an expression of colonialism, and they tend to be sympathetic to countries like Russia and China that are in opposition. But they argue in this press release that somehow doing that constitutes illegal activity. There's a huge free speech implication if you read this. I mean, the ACLU should be all over this. Anyone concerned about civil liberties should look into this document. They're being accused of spreading their own understanding of world events, and that is being called operating as a foreign agent. And they're calling that a crime. They could get 10 years in prison for just expressing their view of world events.
This would set an unbelievably dangerous precedent. They could go after anyone with a differing view of the war, of any of the government, the current government orthodoxy. If you present an alternative viewpoint, they could then, and then if you just happen to have a connection with any Russians whatsoever, I suppose, or if they've even with this, it sounds like, let's say the Russians. They involved themselves in the Uruhu movement. So if you have a movement that's going on and you've got certain viewpoints, and then maybe somebody from Russia involves themselves and says, hey, okay, I like this, maybe we'll support this, then suddenly you're a criminal. Suddenly you could be charged. You could serve 10 years in prison because somebody happens to like your viewpoint and maybe wants to support your viewpoint. That is a dangerous precedent to set.
It's very scary. They allege that this group went to some conferences in Russia, which is not a crime. They attended some conferences, and at these conferences, they spoke, and their views overlap with Russia's view on a number of things. They view the government in Kiev as not representing the Ukrainian people. They point out that in 2014 there was a coup, and Yanukovych was toppled and replaced with someone handpicked by the United States. And they have pointed out that as Black people, they're not thrilled about these white supremacist pro-Hitler forces that seem to be well embedded among the Ukrainians. But none of this is some conspiracy from Russia. It means they went to a conference, they met with some people who already agreed with them. They talked to them, they went on a video conference call, they sent out some emails, they made some statements. None of this is a crime. This is supposed to be the United States where we have freedom of speech. And if you have a different analysis of U.S. foreign policy than the prevailing one, you're allowed to spread that, and you're allowed to attend conferences in other countries with people who agree with you. There's not a crime here at this point, and that's the scary thing. I mean, the fact that they would even mention this in the state of the Department of Justice document, they're accusing them of doing things that are perfectly within their rights as Americans to do. And it's pretty clear this indictment is meant as intimidation. It's about trying to scare people like you, Kim, from doing what you do on your YouTube channel and challenging the prevailing narrative. If you read it, I mean, the way this document from the Department of Justice is written, it's making it sound like it is a crime to question U.S. foreign policy, to present the other side of the story. Everyone should be up in arms about this. This is huge.
This is huge. This is actually huge that they're doing this, because they always start with an underdog when they're doing this. They always start with somebody smaller that they can squash when no one's paying attention. And they know that the Uruhu movement is more of a niche group. It's a niche movement. Not a lot of people paying attention to the Uruhu movement. So they can go after them, do this, set this precedent, and then start to go after larger and larger and larger groups or more prominent people that, because they have a precedent that was set. And they said, yeah, see, this was a crime. This is what now you've got Chairman O'Malley sitting in prison for 10 years, which he's how old, by the way, in his 80s, isn't he? So he'd be getting the rest of his life in prison potentially, sitting in there, and they'd say, well, this is what could happen to you if you canoodle at all with Russians and you have a viewpoint that is against the mainstream orthodoxy of the United States. And that's not because you've adopted the viewpoints of these Russians who happen to be around you. You just they agree with you. You agree with them. There's an agreement there. You happen to share the same opinion. It has nothing to do with anything other than we happen to share the same opinion. That is incredibly scary. Of course, they don't do this if you share the same opinion with a Brit. They don't do this if you share the same opinion with somebody in France or Australia or Germany, right? But they'll do this to you if you share the same opinion with somebody in Russia. And you can bet they're going to be doing this to you if you share the same opinion with somebody in China soon enough. That's next on the list. This will go after anybody and everybody, and they'll start with this group. I mean, this is absolutely frightening. Why do you think is the Uruhu movement, from your knowledge, Caleb? Are they a very powerful group? Are they getting? Are they growing massively? What's the threat that this group potentially poses, or do you think they're just simply being used to set the precedent to start going after more and more people?
This is a small, black nationalist-oriented socialist group that's been in the United States for many decades, doing what they do. And the most disturbing thing in that document is they keep using this phrase, sowing discord, as if that's what the crime is. If you cause people to disagree with you, if you have an argument with people, that constitutes a crime, sowing discord. And the hilarious thing is, if you look at what the Uhuru movement and what the African People's Socialist Party are doing, they're doing the opposite of sowing discord. They are bringing black and white people together. They are setting up farmers markets and performing community services. And their view is that through this process of reparations, they can bring black and white people together. It's kind of the opposite from what we see from CNN, what we see from Fox, and the way U.S. mainstream media has mobilized around the Black Lives Matter issue, using it as kind of a culture war where you're on one side, you support the police, you're on one side, you support the black community, you're on one side. If you support gun control, you're on the other side. They're not framing things in the way mainstream media is at all. Their perspective and the message they put out is one that's far less intended to sow discord, far less polarizing. And I think that what really scared the Department of Justice, in my opinion, is not that they were allegedly sowing discord. It's the opposite. It's that this organization, that despite being small, does have deep roots in places like St. Petersburg, Florida, and St. Louis, Missouri. The fact that they have built these healthcare clinics, the fact that they are doing, kind of like what Fred Hampton did, the leader of the Black Panthers, who started a free breakfast program. As our society is kind of crumbling and coming apart, they're setting up community services and building kind of a layer of political infrastructure of people that go to their farmers markets, of pregnant mothers who get their services and therefore are more likely to listen to their message about colonialism and rejecting U.S. foreign policy and socialism, et cetera. And I think that is what really scares the Department of Justice. They're afraid of seeing a kind of a real community that has a critical view of U.S. foreign policy, establishing roots in neighborhoods and communities across the United States. I think that's what they're really afraid of. And at the end of the day, I mean, it looks like if I look at what they're actually doing, they're bringing peace to communities that have big problems with gun violence. They're providing services. They're doing what our government should be doing and is failing to do.
Yeah, I just want to read this quote in the press release. This is from the Assistant Attorney General Matthew G. Olson of the Justice Department's National Security Division. He says, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service allegedly weaponized our First Amendment rights, freedoms Russia denies its own citizens, to divide Americans and interfere in elections in the United States. The department will not hesitate to expose and prosecute those who sow discord and corrupt U.S. elections in service of hostile foreign interests, regardless of whether the culprits are U.S. citizens or foreign individuals abroad. So yeah, it is about sowing discord. So if you just disagree with the U.S. government and they find you to be a bit of a troublemaker, you're a rebel rouser, then they're going to go after you and say, well, you are sowing discord. And if they can make a single connection between you and a foreign and somebody in a foreign national who maybe is in a position of government, which, by the way, is practically everybody in media, right? Journalists all have connections to officials in foreign governments, to people in foreign governments. And so this could be used to go after journalists. We already see that the government has no problem doing that. This could be used to go after any sort of rising movement, any sort of, and especially as the government ramps us into war. If we go into wartime, if we go into an actual hot war and it's an official World War III, you can bet they'll be using the First Amendment against us over and over and over again. They'll say you are sowing discord, you are committing an act of espionage or treason. That's what they do. They go after people who speak up, groups who rise up and say we're against the war. Anti-war groups are going to be the first ones targeted, and they'll have the precedent set because of this. This is so completely dangerous and scary. So what can people do, Caleb? I know you guys have been really helping out with the defense, and you don't even agree with them politically on everything. It's not even about that, is it?
No, and it's not. And I have a different perspective. I mean, I'm also a socialist, but my views regarding the nature of the working class and class unity, et cetera, are quite different. And I have not worked with them over the years in my involvement in progressive activism. But when I saw that they're being targeted in the way that they are, and when I saw the raids that are going on, and when members of our organization heard the way they're being described and the implications, legally speaking, where they're basically trying to outlaw criticism of U.S. foreign policy, I thought our organization has to be involved. Now, I know that they are very worried about the possibility of their members being indicted and now at this point, going to federal prison, the possibility that they plan to fight this. They have a legal defense. They are trying to raise money for their defense. And I know that is a very important thing to them, and that they also want to mobilize people to speak up about this. And what disturbs me is that there are so many of these progressive people that love to talk about the Black Panthers from 40 or 50 years ago and love to say Black Lives Matter and give the fist, and it's so trendy and hip to be woke. But here we have a group of actual Black activists who have had their homes raided and are now being threatened with 10 years in prison just for speaking a certain way and just for, sowing discord with their words. And I don't see people speaking up on their behalf. And it's very frightening for me to see that, because it shows that a lot of what we hear from our U.S. officials, from Biden and Kamala Harris, all the way down to many of these progressive and left-wing YouTubers, is really just hollow bombast, right? They're trying to give the American government a woke makeover, the moral authority to attack countries like Russia by saying, oh, we're the center of anti-racism and LGBT rights, so now we have the moral authority to go attack other countries that we condemn for not being as woke as we are. It's all very, very phony. One thing that I will also add that is worth pointing out is I think that Biden in particular has had a grudge against the Uhuru movement for many decades, because in 2008, when Biden was running as vice president under Obama, the Uhuru movement disrupted Barack Obama's speeches in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it made national news that Black activists from the Uhuru movement, they stood alone among the Black activist community for calling out Barack Obama to his face, for saying that he wasn't taking action around police brutality, saying that he wasn't really moving to stop the home foreclosure crisis the way he said he was. And it got national attention during the presidential campaign of 2008 that this group of Black activists were willing to expose Barack Obama for what he was. We saw that all the issues the Black community was concerned about got worse under the Obama administration. And that, by the time Barack Obama had left office, Baltimore had gone up in flames and Ferguson had months of rioting, and that Barack Obama's promise that he was going to make a more perfect union and he was going to solve racial discord in the United States was all bunk. Well, they saw it back in 2008, and they were brave enough to challenge Barack Obama on that to his face. and get on national TV calling him out. And I think Biden has had it in for these people since then. I think the FBI has been watching these people since then and looking for anything they could possibly get them for, because they did that, because they had the bravery, and that in the black community, among black activist groups, when Barack Obama first came into office, there was this consensus that he had to be supported. They didn't go along with it. They had the courage to kind of go against the grain and call him out. And I think that's part of why they've been targeted like this.
That, and of course, Biden doesn't like Russia, so you can mix the two together, and you've got yourself, a winning combination. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how, not just how, you mentioned, you make great points about all of these people that say, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter, and they're not really saying anything about these arrests and these indictments. But I'm going to be interested to see how people on the right, this is a socialist group, the Uhuru movement, but it'll be interesting to see if people on the right, who are, of course, very anti-socialist, anti-communist, if they will also speak up on behalf of this group, because this is no different than what happened to Trump. This is what they were trying to nail Trump for, and now they're going after this group instead, and I'm sure others are probably in the mix as well, or they've got their sights set on certain other groups and people. So I'm going to be interested to see if people on the right will also speak up on behalf of this organization and how the dangerous precedent that this sets. So where can people help them? Where's the defense fund?
I believe you can check out their website. I believe there's going to be a link as well below.
Yeah.
The People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, the African People's Socialist Party. They have done a lot to raise awareness. One thing I do want to add is that these people may be on the left or socialists, but I am convinced that part of the reason they're being targeted is because they are not Democrats. If they were good Democrats, if they were rallying the black community to vote for the Democrats, this wouldn't be happening. And, the way the indictment reads and makes such a big deal out of their election campaigns, claiming that their election campaigns were directed from Russia, which their attorneys are prepared to prove in court is not the case. I think it also indicates that the Democrats, they take the black community's votes for granted. And they don't appreciate independent black activists saying, look, the Democrats haven't been good to us. We're going to run our own campaign. Part of this is suppression of third parties and suppression of electoral activism on the part of independent activists in the black community. And let me also add that this idea of painting all dissent in the United States, and particularly the dissent of black people, as being a foreign conspiracy, there's a decades-long history of that. Martin Luther King Jr. was called a communist, a foreign agent, a traitor. There was a billboard that purported to show a picture of him at a communist training school. During the Second World War, the Nation of Islam and their leaders, Elijah Muhammad and the people that eventually were the organization of Malcolm X, they were thrown in prison because they were critical of the war, and they didn't think that black people should fight against Japan, and that there is a history of painting dissent among the African-American community as if it is some kind of foreign conspiracy. And the implications of it are very, very dangerous.
Very, very dangerous. Caleb, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your work in helping defend these people that are being targeted. We definitely need more of that. So we're going to stay on top of this story and keep bringing it up, because this is like a Julian Assange type moment in a lot of ways. And we've just got to keep the spotlight on these types of cases that the government is going to be, they're setting new precedents, very dangerous ones. So Caleb, thank you so much for joining the show.
Sure thing.